Welcome to episode 122 of Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast, sponsored by Educate and Rejuvenate, how yoga can help you calm your teacher life with Brett Larkin. This interview is such a huge treat. If you have ever tried yoga but thought it wasn't for you, or if you've ever considered it, or if you're a dedicated yogi, no matter what, you are probably going to learn something new from this episode. And even the way that Brett shares about yoga, about what it is, about what it means to have a yoga life, just might change the way you think about it. So you do not want to miss this interview. Let's dive in. Welcome to Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. I'm Kelsey Sorensen, a former elementary teacher and current homeschool mom. And even though I've been a resource creator since 2014, I've realized that printables alone aren't all you need in order to thrive as a teacher or homeschool parent. That's why I also created this show and got certified as a life coach to help you finally kick burnout to the curb and feel confident with whatever challenges come your way. With the right mindset strategies and new teaching inspiration, you're going to be well on your way to your best teacher life. Now let's go. Welcome to Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you have been listening for a while, so glad to have you back for another incredible interview today. Last week, I interviewed Gasper Randazzo, who was featured on Netflix's TV show The Trust recently. If you missed that episode, you do not want to miss it. So be sure to go back and listen to that one after this one. Today, what I've got for you is an incredible interview with Brett Larkin, author of Yoga Life, and she is a yoga instructor with like hundreds of thousands of followers, and she is just so incredible. And it's really interesting how I got to having her on the podcast, actually. I got a cold pitch in my inbox, and we get a ton of cold pitches for podcasts. Like probably every day we have somebody being like, can I be on the podcast? Can I be on the podcast? And usually we just have to like send them a form and be like, I'll get to you if I can. But normally I have so many other things planned for all of you that I can't get every guest on. But when I saw hers, and it was all about yoga and mindset and meditation and mindfulness and all the different things she could speak on, like spirituality, all that, I just felt really drawn to it. I was like, you know what? I think I actually want to hear this one out. I think I want to hear what Brett has to say. And I'm so glad that I did. And it was such an informative interview. I learned a lot from the interview. In fact, I loved it so much that as soon as the interview ended, I got out my Kindle Scribe. And if you've been listening for a while, you know I love my Kindle Scribe. It is like a Kindle, but you can write on it as well. I read at an average of about one self-help book a week. This year, I'm actually, if I look on my Goodreads challenge, I'm actually ahead of pace on the one book a week. It's kind of crazy, but I always highlight, I take notes. That is how I learn and am able to consume, and I synthesize the information I learn in each of the books, and I just love it. I'm able to journal on it, write my wins each day. I do all of it on the one device, and it just comes with me, and I love it. But I immediately got it out, and I purchased her book, Yoga Life, that we talk about on the podcast, and I cannot wait to dive into it. I like scrolled through it. I'm like, oh, this book is going to be amazing. I have a few other books I'm finishing up, but I'm really going to dive into it soon. It's just everything she has to share on this episode. I can't wait to find what my ideal yoga positions are. She talks about if you've never done yoga, it's actually perfect because you're going to get exactly what you need just by reading the book and finding what's right for you, and you can then leave out the rest. So it's really a lot of overlap between what I talk about. And I'm not a huge yogi. I haven't done any yoga training or anything, but there's so much overlap between like the mindfulness and the nervous system and the body work and our our thoughts and everything that we talk about here that can really tie into the way Brett talks about yoga. So, really excited to dive into this interview. I'm also really excited because Brett is going to be speaking at the 2024 Educate and Rejuvenate Summer Conference. So, if you are an Educate and Rejuvenate or Wife Teacher Mommy Club member, or if you have a ticket, you will get into the event and you will get to see her presentation along with my presentations and the huge speaker lineup we have, which with incredible speakers like Gasper from last week's interview is one of our keynotes. Christina Kuzmich is our other keynote. Go to educateandrejuvenate.com to learn more about the event. It's going to be great. Okay, let's read Brett's bio quick, and then we're going to get right into this interview. So Brett Larkin is the founder of Uplifted Yoga and the author of Yoga Life, Habits, Poses, and Breathwork to channel joy amidst the chaos. Her training has set the standard for quality online certification since 2015 and has matriculated thousands of yoga teachers. Brett's award-winning YouTube channel with 500,000 subscribers and Uplifted Yoga podcast empowers listeners to actively design their lives using yoga's ancient wisdom. Yoga enthusiasts love her courses on Kundalini, prenatal yoga, and the Uplifted Yoga Academy. Learn more at brettlarkin.com. Okay, let's get to the interview. Hey, welcome to Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast, Brett. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here too.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this interview because when I got the email about possibly having you on the show, one thing that I loved about what you do and the idea of chatting about yoga on the podcast isn't really a topic we've touched on yet. So, one reason that I love the idea of chatting about yoga on the podcast, it's not really a topic that we've talked about lately, but a lot of teachers, like we are burned out more than ever before. So many are leaving the profession, and then moms who homeschool, that's a whole other like part of burnout and feeling like you're around kids all the time and never get a moment for yourself. And so we talk about like a few different things here. We talk about like our thought work and that is really important. But sometimes we get so stuck in our heads that we need to come into our bodies and realize what's going on. And we're so stuck in our head that we maybe don't even recognize what emotions we're feeling, or even if we're dysregulated or stuck in the stress and burnout. And I feel like yoga can be just such a great way to work through the stress, to get embodied, to get in touch with our spirit. So how does yoga help with all of this?
Well, I so relate to everything you're saying. I mean, we're living in the information age. We're inundated with more information than ever before. I think I have a stat in my book that's like we're exposed to more information in a day than our great-great-grandparents were in their entire lifetime. And then add on kids, add on if you're teaching or homeschooling. I mean, even just thinking of Zoom culture, it's like we're just floating heads, right? So there's a lot of over intellectualization. There's so much information out there. And I agree. It's like, I think the journey of like the next 100 years is going to be the journey downward, like downward back into our body and regulating the nervous system. And something that everyone can do just listening to this right now is just put one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. I find that like touching my actual body reminds me that I have a body. And just observing your breath. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But to me, just that simple awareness of like, I have a body. How is my body breathing? Like that is yoga. Even if you're not on a mat, even if you're not wearing yoga pants, even if you're not doing any poses, my definition of yoga is that awareness, that introspection. So we can dive into that more. But I just want to preface and say that anyone who's just observing their breath and getting their hands on their body, for me, is a yoga success story already.
I love that. Like it doesn't have to, I feel like people think of yoga and they're like, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm not flexible." I mean, I've thought that too. Like, "Oh, I can't like do all the incredible poses as well as the other people." But it's not necessarily about that. And I love what you said there. Can we rewind a little bit though and talk a little bit about a little bit about yourself, but also what inspired you to like get into yoga, to write Yoga Life, to inspire people everywhere about yoga?
Yes. Well, I initially found yoga because I had a lot of anxiety. So that was kind of when I was finishing up college, and I just fell in love with the practice. It gave me an awareness that the voices in my head weren't me, which some people already know, but others like me weren't clued in until later in life that this negative inner dialogue or these, the cast of characters that lived rent free in my brain telling me to do more, strive more, be the best, that kind of perfectionist voice, like I didn't have to listen to it. It wasn't until I started doing yoga and getting awareness. The yogis say the more space between your breath, the more space between your thoughts. So as you slow down your breath, you start to notice all those voices and realize that they aren't you. However, everything changed when I became a mom. When I became a mom, I was going through a very rapid period of growth in my business, and I was also the full-time care provider for my father, who was dying of cancer. I'm an only child. My parents are divorced. So when I say I was his sole care provider, it was literally like my newborn was in one room in my house, and the bedroom next door was my dad dying. And he died that year. So it was this crazy year of like business growth, walking my dad through this death portal, figuring out how to be a new mom. And all the yoga that I had done up to that point was failing me. Like I couldn't go to a 60-minute class anymore. I couldn't even teach or have time to do the routines that I was telling other people to do that I was putting on YouTube. Up until that point, I had been this cheerleader of like, yoga every day, you can do it. And I was doing these long practices. And the minute I became a mom and a caretaker of an elderly parent, like all of that went out the window. And I knew I had to reinvent what yoga was and how it was working in my life and what it meant for me. And that is the inspiration for the book. The idea is that yoga is not this additional thing you have to do. I called the book Yoga Life because the idea is like your whole life becomes like a yoga studio, and you can sprinkle the ancient wisdom of yoga even just here and there between other activities. So we can talk about what that looks like and how I change my practice during that really intense year, if that's something you're interested in diving into.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think this is all so relatable because I think a lot of us like, and it's actually come up on coaching calls, like very similar things to this, where we feel like, oh, well, I used to be able to do things this way. Why is it now harder to do it that way? Like, whether it's a new addition to the family or it's they took a different position at a different grade level. Like it was so easy for me, but now they're
Mhm.
relearning a new grade level or something like that. And just realizing that there are different times and seasons in our lives where it might look a little bit different, but it's not all or nothing. It's not like, oh, since I can't do a 60-minute yoga class, that means yoga is just out of my life right now.
Exactly. I
So,
love what you just said. And I'd love to paint a picture for everyone listening right now. It's like, because this is a huge reframe that's going to help you empower you to fit yoga in, is if we all, I think we could all agree that if we opened a savings account and we put a little bit of money in it each day, that that money would grow, that it would accrue, and that maybe because of compound interest and other things at the bank, like the money would like definitely like over time grow quite a bit. However, when it comes to yoga or breath work, we tend to think that like unless we're at an eco retreat in Bali or wearing perfect yoga clothes or like set up in the perfect yoga space or have an hour to practice, that the results of our practice aren't cumulative. So one of the biggest initial reframes that I would love for moms, teachers, anyone's listening to make is that like even just 2 minutes of breath work or one deep breath in the heat of an argument is worthwhile. It's like dropping pennies into that savings account of your nervous system. And even if it's just 1% a day that you're expanding your nervous system capacity, think about what that means over the course of a year. You are going to be just a completely different place, a completely different person. And then when you start personalizing the breath work and the yoga poses that you choose to do, all of a sudden, instead of that 2 minutes of breath work or 2 minutes of poses being like a couple cents in the savings account, it's like a couple dollars because you're making the little time you have more potent. So that's why I love to talk about personalizing your practice, and we can totally go there next because that's what I ended up doing. When I ran out of time, I was like, okay, I need to get the most bang for my yoga buck in like the 10 minutes that I have to practice between like baby's nap and dad waking up and needing me, right?
yes.
And so I really started optimizing what I chose to practice.
I love that. And before we dive into like personalizing it, I want to remember that some of the people listening might like not even be doing yoga. They're like, how do I personalize something that I don't even know how to do? You know. So what would you say like let's say we're like bare beginner here with yoga. Like how do they get like started and then personalize it to them?
Point. Yeah, well, I think the first thing to realize is that yoga is not gymnastics. the images we see of yoga on social media are just such a small aspect of the practice. I have a chapter in my book about the history of yoga and how yoga came west. But the reality is that the true yoga, the ancient yoga, was always about us being able to best manage our energy. I like to call yoga the science of energy management, which means it is like fantastic for moms and teachers or anyone who is busy, because the yogis figured out basically millennia ago that certain breath work and postures energize us. Other breathwork and postures help calm us down. And if we look at what people are struggling with, we see Starbucks on every corner. We see, I think the number one over the counter medication that's sold is like sleeping aids. So we have a crisis where we don't know how to increase our energy or how to calm down at night. And so yoga can really help with that. So it's not just about relaxation. It is not about fancy poses. It's really about how can I best optimize my energy even amidst challenging situations that are coming at me. And to understand that anything you do happen to do on a yoga mat is like the easy yoga. The real yoga is happening off the mat. On a yoga mat is a very controlled environment. Like no one's honking at me, no one's cutting me off in traffic, kids hopefully aren't yelling or climbing on top of me. It's like when I get out into the world is when we really want to be able to have that awareness of our inner dialogue and deepen our breath. So what I would say to someone who's a beginner is like, don't be intimidated. You really only need 10 to 20 minutes a day if you want to have like a formal practice. And you only really need to practice 6 to 8 postures that feel good for you. And my book has like a quiz that helps you figure out what those postures are going to be based on a variety of things, physical, emotional, and mental. But there's a part of the book where I just talk about how less is more. So you don't need to go to a studio. You don't need to like pick a yoga style. Oh my gosh, the styles are so confusing. Like people just get hung up there, right? They're like, do I do
Yeah,
hatha or ashtanga or
decision
yin? Like,
fatigue, right? Oh, I have to decide. Like that's just
yes,
like a barrier to entry. Yeah.
you can like throw all of that out and you can just discover what I call the soulmate postures. Okay. Your soulmate yoga poses, that's just like the 6 to 8 poses or breathing techniques that really serve to balance you. You don't need anything more. So I know you're like, how do people start without personalizing? But I almost feel like if you haven't started yoga and this is going to be your first entry, like that's the best because I wish I had learned yoga just like, okay, tell me about yourself. These are the things that would really work well for you and just do those. Don't worry about anything else. So if you can do the personalized way in, I think that really works. But it's just like having a lot of grace, realizing it's not always going to happen. Like sometimes my practice looks like I'm doing cat cow on my bathroom floor while my husband shaves and we're talking about weekend plans, right? Like, is that my ideal morning practice? No, but it's better than nothing. At least I'm getting essential spinal movement in. At least I'm connecting with my breath. So just finding these little, I mean, we can talk more about yoga habits a little later, but little ways to slip it in and come back to that money in the bank analogy, right? I know that even though that cat cow was like, I'm talking to my husband, like it's cumulative. It's money in my nervous system bank that is going to help serve me later when my son is having a tantrum, or like the better I can feel in my body, the more I can be present and able to assist him.
Yes, I love what you said about like, it doesn't always have to be the ideal like what we would do for yoga. Like some days, like you mentioned, on your bathroom floor or whatever. And that's kind of we talked about we did this self-love challenge we just finished up on the podcast. And on one of the days they talked about like having a minimum baseline. Like maybe you just want like 3 minutes of movement a day or like whatever it is. And you can always try to do more than that, but like if you just have that minimum or like those like maybe just one pose that like is like if I do nothing else I do this like
Yeah, looking inward. I have so many people in my community who ask like, how do I get consistent? How do I have a consistent practice? And the answer is like, you make your yoga practice so nourishing that you never want to skip it, which requires a huge reframe, right? This isn't about following along to someone else's routine, although you can definitely do that. I have like 1,000 free videos on YouTube. But this is about like, even if you start with one of my videos, let's say you can mute me, you can pause me, you could go off and do your own thing after a little bit. Like I actively encourage that. You want to be able to design some breath work and poses that are going to feel nourishing. And depending on what's going on in your life, if your baby's sleeping through the night or not, like that's going to look very different in all these different seasons. So to me, an advanced yoga practice is this skill of like yogic adaptability. do I just know enough postures? And it's really like you just need to know like 12. Like if you just read my book, like you're set. Um, to like meet yourself in the imperfect moment you're in. There is no perfect practice. It's like, how can I design an imperfect practice to meet me in the imperfect life moment I'm in to nourish myself and fill my cup?
I
That's
love
my
that so
philosophy.
much. So like in your book, they're able to go in and they're able to just like find the poses. And by there I mean like I can't wait. I'm gonna grab your book. I actually wanted to do it before this interview, but I actually just finished my manuscript for my book last week. So which is really exciting.
Congratulations. Yeah, I'd be happy to send you a copy. Like how it starts is we start with a personality quiz. So I don't know, I'm so gonna date myself here, but like when I was a kid, I loved at like summer camp doing like those
Yes,
Cosmo
yes,
quizzes. Do you
yes,
remember
I
those from
do.
like 17 magazine and stuff of like, they were like just like so funny goofy. So I was like, okay, I want this to like be what we're doing. So the book starts with like a little personality quiz so that you can find out the dominant element within you. And I don't want this to be too confusing for folks, but according to traditional Chinese medicine and the Ayurvedic system within yoga is the same. It's like all of us have one dominant element that kind of makes up our personality and informs how we move through life. So you're either air, earth, or fire dominant. And if you know that, it's so important. Like, this is the first thing yoga beginners should be taught because if you know that, then it informs what breath work is going to serve to balance you, what breath work is going to skew you out of balance. Like, for example, I'm pitta dominant, which is the fire element. So, breath of fire, which is like a pranayama breathing technique that's very heating, isn't ideal for me if my goal is to, show up really calm for my kids. Like the water breath is a better choice. So then the book moves through how you would set up your own personal practice. There's 5 components to a personal practice. You sit, you stretch, you strengthen, you meditate, all these little pieces. They can each be like 3 minutes. And then once you know your dominant element, there's more quizzes in the book that are like, these are what I think would be the soulmate postures for you for each section of your little ritual. And then because we know life happens, the end of the book is like, okay, you've made this little 20-minute ritual. There's a worksheet you can print out. And it's like, okay, let's just imagine everything's gone to hell in a handbasket, right? Like you woke up late, you didn't sleep, like you have this dominant element. Here's how you take your 20-minute thing and make it a 5-minute thing. Here's how you would like remove these sections. Oh, the house is clean, you have a babysitter. Like, here's how you'd expand your 20-minute thing to be a 60-minute thing. And then there's like the yoga habits, which are all the little ways you can sprinkle yoga in, like in the car or while you're
I love
cooking,
that.
and more like
Is there like a
philosophical
yoga
fun
habit
things like
example
that.
that you could share?
Yeah. Yes, totally. One of my favorite things to do is actually like see how many yoga habits I can squeeze into a day because I'm fire dominant, so I'm very
I
competitive.
love it.
But yeah, just to give some examples, like one yoga habit is just to stretch while I'm watching TV. So I always force myself, like there's a rule in my house that if you're watching TV, you have to stretch for at least half the show. This is for me and my husband. So now, is this as ideal as like doing this, really serene stretch in my bedroom with candles for like 70 minutes? And sometimes I manage to do that. No, it's not. But again, it's better than nothing. Like another example, I really love to use the car and especially the garage. I think for a lot of moms, um, like the garage can become a really great place to do breath work or meditation. For example, obviously, if you're homeschooling, this doesn't work, but if you do drop your kids off at school, you drive home. And for me, it's like I know the minute I enter my house, like there's going to be things I need to do. I'm going to feel like I need to jump on email. But before I cross that threshold, the garage is kind of this space in between worlds. So I often just stay in the car and I'm like, I'm going to just put my hands on my body, check in with myself. How do I feel? What do I want? And practice just a couple slow, deep breaths. And again, these are small things, but they add up. When the tea is boiling, I love tea. You can see me drinking it right now. I used to like scroll social media. Now, when I'm waiting for the tea to boil, all of you can do this. I just put my hands on the counter and walk my seat back. So I'm kind of stretching my spine. So I'm kind of in an upside down L shape. And I just wag my booty side to side. And it's just like this lovely like lengthen the spine and low back stretch just while I wait for the tea to boil and I slowly deepen my breath. When I'm talking to my kids, I love to take my feet a little wider apart and just do some hip circles to mobilize my low back and pelvis. So I might be talking to them, telling them it's time to clean up or time to cook dinner or whatever, but I'm adding in a little mobility. And then, of course, there's uh, a psychological aspect to this where yoga gives us these really incredible principles about how to live our life, like what yoga in action looks like in our relationships. So I practice those off the mat as well. So we can go into those if you want. It's kind of different than some of the movement and breathwork pieces. But yeah, those are just some fun
Oh,
examples. Does
yeah.
that
And
help
I feel
paint a
like
picture?
each of those is kind of like you were saying, they're all making a little deposit into that bank that is going to
Yes.
grow. And again, help our
Yes.
nervous system regulate, help us to get more connected with ourselves. So I love these little habits and how they can help us to incorporate yoga into our life, like yoga life. I love that so much.
Yeah, so there's a text in yoga called the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras are sort of this guidebook about how to really achieve enlightenment. So I actually don't think it's that practical for moms, which is controversial to say because everyone loves this text. But really, it is more designed for people who are like living in an ashram and have 10 hours a day to practice yoga. So when I was going through that really difficult year with my father passing and looking after him and becoming a new mom, and I remember I told you, I was like, how does yoga still work for me? Like, I don't need like to achieve enlightenment, I need to like make it through bedtime. Like that's my goal, right? And is there anything in the Yoga Sutras that can actually help me in this situation? And there's actually one sutra or one line of the Yoga Sutras that actually speaks directly to this. And it's Sutra 2.1. And it says yoga in action is. And it's really important that this piece of the text talks about yoga in action and differentiates it from all the rest of the yoga that's in the book, which is kind of like yoga for enlightenment. This is like yoga if you're a householder and acting in the world, meaning like you have a job and you're not meditating in a cave, right? So I got really interested in this one sutra. Sutra just means thread or like aphorism, essentially. And it says yoga in action is, and then there's 3 words. And I absolutely fell in love with my spin on these 3 words because Sanskrit's a little bit of a difficult language in the sense that one word can mean many different things. So often you might read one translation of a yogic text and it's very different from someone else's translation because of how they choose to interpret it. So the 3 words in this sutra are svadhyaya, tapas, and Ishvari Pranadhana. So I'll go through each one. Svadhyaya, the first one, is often translated to mean self study, right? Or even the study of scripture. I like to think of it as self awareness. And if you're doing yoga in action, meaning acting in the real world, it's like, what's the point of self awareness if I don't take what I learn through introspecting to nourish myself and to take care of myself? So I actually translate svadhyaya as like the self awareness that leads to self care. So that would be that introspecting, the putting the hands on the body. How do I feel? What do I want? How can I nourish myself?
Yes.
Kind
Giving
of
ourselves
principle.
that love and compassion and knowing what we need. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that's half the battle, right? Like most of the time we're frazzled or we're upset and we're not even in touch with our true desire or we don't even know what would be nourishing. So it's like we're set up to fail. And you ran a self-love challenge, so you would totally be down with svadhyaya, like you're already practicing it. The second word, tapas, is an interesting one. That often gets translated to mean heat, like the heat that you might feel in a chair pose or a difficult pose, but it's so much more than that. I think of tapas as like that intentional friction or that alchemy. I think of like wood when the wood's being burned by the fire, or think of it as like your digestive system that's like transforming food into energy. It's the alchemy of purposely changing and transforming something. So what this looks like, or the cheap phrase that I use for this one, is cultivate the opposite. Tapas basically means the friction, the resistance that you feel when you're going against your default programming. So if I'm someone who always shows up late, tapas for me might be forcing myself to arrive 10 minutes early. That's going to be going against my habitual kind of patterning and doing things in a new way. So tapas might also show up in the yoga mat. Like if you're someone who is super addicted to doing like hot yoga, tapas for you might mean doing like a yin or a restorative type of yoga at home. That's going to feel very different than what you're comfortable with, different with your pattern, different than your pattern. So, what I love about this concept of tapas is it's so personal. It's so unique. Like if I'm really stingy, tapas might mean like leaving a really lavish tip at a restaurant, even though that feels super uncomfortable for me. And what all of this is doing is like it's expanding our capacity, right? Of how we show up in the world and what we're comfortable with. So it forces us to grow and move through life in new ways. So that's that second principle of tapas.
I love
And I
that
love it also because
concept.
it like,
I'm just like
yeah,
eating this up. Yeah.
yeah, because it forces you to experiment as well, right? Like, maybe you always do the homeschooling in, like, a certain order of the subjects, and you're like, "You know what? Let's cultivate the opposite, change it up, we're gonna go outside first," and then you never know how the day flows from there. Like, often we just get so set in our ways, the brain just wants to do everything the same because your brain doesn't really care about your evolution, it just cares about your
Right.
survival,
For sure.
unfortunately.
And
It
that's the
cares a little bit
default.
about
And this is where
procreation
we
as well.
consciously override that default. And we're like, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to do things a little differently. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's tapas, like you hit it nail on the head. The third concept is Ishvara Pranidhana. So this often gets translated as God by some yogic scholars. It's often translated as like surrender, believing in something greater than yourself. But it's really like surrender is a nice translation. What I use as my cheat phrase for that one is relinquishing control. Relinquish control, which I know as moms, it's like so hard, so challenging. But the thing that I've found is like if I relinquish control, even if it's just within my own mind, I have more energy to put towards myself and I'm able to be more relaxed. So let me give an example. And I think I used this example somewhere in the book. I might tell my son, who's, let's say he's 4 in this moment, like, go clean up your plate, like take your plate to the counter. That is like a very controlling statement, which makes sense from like a parent going to a kid, like I want him to clean up. But the minute I say it like that, it's creating this dynamic of like I'm telling him what to do. And now we're in a situation where he's either going to obey me or he's not. And then my brain has a lot of stories about like, if he obeys me, that means he's a good kid and I'm a good mom. And it's kind of like we're on this good trajectory. If he doesn't obey me, what does that mean? Like your brain makes all these stories, right? It's like, maybe he's a bad kid and I'm a bad mom. Why doesn't my kid listen to me? So even with just a simple rephrase of, I would love this table to be clean. Do you see how that's different than like, go put your plate on the counter? In that, I'm instead of being controlling, I'm expressing a pure desire. I'm saying, I would love this table to be clean. And then in my own mind, I relinquish control of whether the table is going to get cleaned by him or not. Even if it's just energetically in my own mind, it's like I find my kids can sense a difference. Like they know I'm unattached to the outcome and that I'm not going to make it mean anything. And very often they rise to meet me because I've stayed in desire instead of control. So they're actually like excited to be my hero and please me. Again, they're little, so sometimes they don't. But there is just an example of how relinquishing control can work in just like a very simple practical moment with your kids. And then there's also like relinquishing control of like he wants to wear his Bluey sweatshirt, like, again, even though it's dirty. Like, I'm willing to relinquish control. Like, do I really care that his nursery school might be like, "Why is he wearing the same shirt 5 days in a row?" Like, no, I don't. I don't care. So I'm relinquishing control of that. So I think what's hard about being a
Like we can't control what other people think anyway, right? So
exactly.
it's like,
Exactly. I think one of the hardest things about being a mom is like knowing when do I want to relinquish control and when do I not want to relinquish control. And it's always ultimately to me it comes down to safety. Like if they're playing on the stairs, it's like I'm going to control and remove them from the stairs. Like you're not allowed to play on the stairs. But if it's
right.
something like
You don't
mismatching
want them to fall
socks
down.
or food, like whether to eat something or not, it's like we all have to draw our own boundaries and lines about because the thing is when I try to control, it's according to the yogic system, like that is a waste of energy. That's why this sutra is so fascinating because it's like if you're practicing yoga in action, yoga is a science of energy management. It doesn't make sense to try to control the uncontrollable. Like that's a huge waste of energy.
Yeah. Yeah, where you could maybe like if I surrender this, I can put that energy into something that's actually
Or
productive
I could put that
that'll
energy into
help me
self-care,
to
but yeah. So I always say,
or
the more
self-care.
relinquish
Yeah.
control, the more energy you have for self-care. So let's say I'm frustrated by the Bluey sweatshirt situation. Like, if I relinquish control and I'm like, "You know what? I'm just gonna let him wear it," and then I put my hands on my own body, and I take all that energy that I was about to expend, making him change, him being upset, being controlling, and just direct all that energy inward, giving myself that attention, it's like I'm filling my own cup, and that's why, like, relinquishing control and self-care go really well together, because a lot of times we need to relinquish control and then just actually parent ourselves, like, deal with our own discomfort.
Yes, because a lot of times it is about that. Like we're putting that on our kids when it's really like we could, yeah, take that. Like,
Yeah, it's really about us, like,
yeah,
or us being worried, like, what his teacher's gonna think
yeah,
or
for
whatever,
sure.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this has all been so good. And I feel like it's been had so much clarification about how we can fit yoga into like our everyday lives and how it's like a practice like in other areas rather than just like being on a yoga mat doing a bunch of poses and things like that. So,
Yeah, exactly. Like on a yoga mat, what a beautiful place to practice self-care, the practice of tuning inward. How do I feel? What do I want? Right? Like the yoga mat's a great place to practice that. The yoga mat's a great place to practice tapas. Okay, I'm going to maybe put myself in a position that's a little uncomfortable and I'm going to see how that goes. Like these are new sensations in my thigh. This feels weird. This feels different. Can I breathe? Right? It's like a simulation for what we're going to have to deal with off the mat later with our kids, right? Can I relinquish control of like this pose just doesn't feel good for me, right? Or I'm just, just going to skip this whole section of my routine today because I don't have time or I'm not in the mood or I'm on my cycle or whatever it is. So the mat is like a place where we can practice all these concepts in our body. And then off the mat is where the real yoga is happening. It's like, how can I embody these in a conversation with my partner or a colleague or a child and how I'm showing up?
I love that. I love this. I think this could be a great reframe for those who've maybe tried yoga and they've been like, I don't know, it just didn't work for me. But maybe if they can kind of take what they've learned from this podcast, but also probably take a step further and get a copy of your book because that can help them find their oh, what was it you called it? Their their poses that will the
They're soulmate
personalized
poses.
the what?
Yes. The soulmate poses.
Soulmate poses, yes. So it's like I can't quite remember what you called them, but yeah, that will help them to be able to apply this to their life, to be able to find their poses, and then also like learn even more about the habits and everything that you have to share. So I'm excited to
Yeah.
read Yoga Life. I'm very excited. I'm going to get it on my Kindle. It's going to be one of my next
Yeah,
reads.
and I
So
think for moms, this is so important because we're role modeling what self-care looks like for our children. So that's one of the things that really inspires me to do this work and to get on my mat every day and to practice these off the mat yoga habits as well because, we can tell our kids all this stuff, but it's just in one ear out the other. They just model our behavior. So, especially if you have a daughter at home, like modeling for her what self-care looks like, that you might need to put your hands on your body or take some deep breaths or take a step out, right? To regulate your breathing or nourish yourself. Like her seeing that is so, so powerful. So I think like very early when I was a new mom, I was always like, okay, I'll do yoga when they're napping. I'll do yoga. Like I was kind of like secretly trying to do it when they weren't around. And I still love to do yoga when my kids aren't around because it can be very deep and profound and peaceful. But more and more, I've been challenging myself to be like, no, they need to see me doing this and modeling this so that they know that this is a lifestyle and that I'm thinking about how to regulate my energy. Or even sometimes we like the other day we parked and we got to the playground and they were like, let's get out. Why aren't we going out of the car? And I was like, mommy needs to take a couple deep breaths before we can leave. I'm feeling a little anxious. So I'm just going to sit here and breathe. And, like I want them to see that because it's in the modeling of it that
yes.
they really recognize and get what's happening. And I want them to know how to regulate and how to identify when they're overwhelmed and need to take a break.
Yeah, and that's really what we do as educators. We model things. We show them like, okay, this is how we do it. And we can do that with other things too, with yoga and with I've had some of our members even say that they have taken things like, let's take a deep breath as a class, and then their
Mhm.
students are able to learn how to regulate themselves. And when we take care of ourselves and fill our own cup, we're able to help our students and our children so much more than if we didn't. So, and yoga is just a fantastic way to do that. And especially, I love the way that you shared about yoga. I hadn't heard all of this before, and it was a new perspective. So I learned a lot from this interview too. So I appreciate you coming on. It's been fun.
Yeah, I'm so glad I got to be here. And yeah, think about bedtime too. Bedtime's a great time to breathe with your kids. It's like my favorite time to like slip that in. So lots of fun things you can do there.
Yes. So where can our listeners, if they want to connect with you more, get we'll put a link to your book in the show notes, but where can they follow you? What else would you like to share with them before we go?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. The book is called Yoga Life. It's available everywhere books are sold. So you can get it on Amazon or bookshop.org. And you can do free YouTube classes with me. Brett Larkin is my website, BRETTLARKIN. So if you just type that into YouTube, you'll find lots of classes. Or on my website, the main thing I do is train yoga teachers. And we have a lot of people who have been primary school teachers or high school teachers come take our online yoga teacher training. It's totally online. I ship you a beautiful manual. So you do have that paper to go with
So
the
fun.
videos that you're watching in our mobile app. Yeah, I'm still like a glitter pen and paper girl at heart. So we ship everyone an actual book and you move through the cohort live with people from all over the world. It's a really beautiful experience. So if you're thinking of, oh, like I want to do my 200-hour teacher training to bring yoga into the classroom or into my homeschooling classroom or just go deeper with some of these philosophical concepts, I would love for you to join us. So yeah, that's everything about me.
That's amazing. Thank you, Brett, so much for your time. And yeah, I can't wait to continue to connect and learn more about yoga through your book.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you're ready to take the next step, I would love for you to purchase a ticket to join me live at Educate and Rejuvenate Summer 2024, the education event of the year happening on July 16th and 17th this year. We have two incredible keynote speakers, Gasper Randazzo, who's a teacher and stand-up comedian who was featured on Netflix on the show The Trust just recently, and Christina Kuzmich, who is an incredible best-selling author, video creator, influencer, mom, amazing person who was also our keynote last year. She's back. Everybody loved her so much. We have an incredible lineup of additional speakers teaching on topics such as math, language arts, reading, social emotional learning, classroom management, homeschooling, and tackling burnout. This year, we have a super clear teacher track and a parent track for homeschoolers. And your ticket gets you access to whichever track you like, or you can even watch sessions from both if you want to. We will start the day all together with a workout each morning. We'll have panels with the speakers. Plus, you'll get to join me for some live coaching, as well as with some of our other club coaches. It is the best professional development you could ever attend. There are prizes, lives, thousands of like-hearted educators all coming together. And all of this is happening from the comfort of your own home. So go to educateandrejuvenate.com now to learn more about the 2024 event. Or if you're listening to this later, that link will show you what is up next as we'll continue to do events like these. And I hope to see you at the next one.